BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Well, it is now November, and we've had a bunch of clouds roll in. Autumn is coming in full swing. We've just seen the falling of most of the leaves around here. And maybe there's also something else that you have seen, and it could have something to do with all these memes that are posting up online about Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein didn't kill himself. Of course, the billionaire and now deceased sex offender, Jeffrey Epstein, was arrested this year and in confinement. The official story is that he committed suicide. But what really happened? The first thing I need to say is that this is not really going to be something that is going to be going into too many of the details associated with the days leading up to Epstein's death, or even any of the background info about Epstein and all the people that he was connected to. This is just going to be something about some of the similarities and patterns that we see with these types of stories. I was seeing a lot of memes on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and just every place under the sun, really, saying that Epstein didn't kill himself. Epstein didn't kill himself. And I began to think, though, maybe there is just a little bit of truth to that. And let's just kind of let the cat out of the bag and sort of just go and say it. Do I believe that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide? Highly improbable. It's highly improbable that this was indeed a suicide, but we always need to bear in mind that we don't always have the full story 100%. There could always be valuable information that isn't available to the general public. So that's one of the reasons why on this channel we often stay away from the current events and focus in more on things from the past. But if we're going to look at some examples of this throughout history, this might be a very bizarre connection. But on this channel, over the summer, we talked about the individual named Thug Bahram. He was perhaps the most prolific serial killer in world history. Allegedly, he murdered 931 people, but once again, just allegedly, that is a legend. But the thing about him was, this was in the mid-1800s in India. He was supposedly executed in private by the British Empire. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, no, I don't believe that. Executed in private. All of his associates are executed in public, and they're saying that he's executed in private. I don't believe that. It's most likely that he cut some sort of deal by turning in other people, kind of like a plea bargain, in exchange for his release and kind of disappearing and living out his life with another identity. They probably either let him go or maybe just gave him some sort of isolation, imprisonment, but it's most likely that he was not executed. And I thought that these whole Epstein didn't kill himself memes were really going to be going down the route of that Jeffrey Epstein did not commit suicide, and he also wasn't even murdered or anything. I thought they were going down that road, and they were going to say that because of Epstein's immense wealth and connections to countless high-profile individuals, whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Bill Clinton, that he would have been able to sort of, once again, be let out of prison under a new identity and just kind of continue living somewhere else under a different name. I mean, just the whole thing about the suicide and the homicide were faked. But the majority of Epstein memes out there are really trying to focus on the fact that they believe that he was murdered by individuals that are associated with the elite sex trafficking rings. Back when we were doing the uploads on Madeleine McCann, I saw some rather convincing information that there are high-level pedophile rings and sex offender rings and just the sex trade rings that operate online. This is not just some wacky conspiracy theory. It seems like these things happen. There is a dark web and there's a deep web, and there are things that are only accessible to certain people. Like they can kind of create things where sex offenders can operate in elite circles. They have URLs that are only accessible to people who have the link. Very hard to detect. It's very difficult for the authorities to go after them. And this all ties into Jeffrey Epstein because, well, you know, why were so many people focusing in on him? Why this rich guy? I mean, there are lots of rich people in the world who commit crimes. What's the big deal about him? Connections to high-profile individuals, as we said, including Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, as well as connections to potential sex rings. Those things do exist. So the thing is, though, I mean, after reading some of the material and some of the articles, it seemed like there was an autopsy that was conducted. It seems like there were real medical staff that were involved with this, and they said that it was what? A homicide. And even on the Wikipedia, it says that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide, but there's some little parentheses right next to it, and they're just sort of saying that this is disputed. So it really seems like there's a very high chance that this was indeed not a suicide, and that there are global elite circles that are just very powerful. I also remember back to the 1980s when John Stockwell was a former CIA director, actually, the highest-ranking CIA individual to go public at the time. And he made some very insightful comments after Iran-Contra when he said that George H.W. Bush was being interviewed by Dan Rather, and Dan Rather was really trying to nail him on the Iran-Contra stuff. And then George Bush just refused to answer the questions. He was just like, the American people don't care anymore. I'm not talking about that stuff. The general public will only care about something if the media consistently brings it up all the time. Like, if the media stops talking about it, the general public will forget about it. And that is one of the things that the oligarchs thrive upon. There have been some kind of consistent themes about that we've been trying to reiterate on this channel. One of them is that the concept of oligarchy is real. You don't have to accept the New World Order. You don't have to accept that there is this type of cabal running the show and pulling strings behind the scenes. But the concept of oligarchy is real. There are small groups of people that have an enormous amount of power. That's number one. Number two is that there are not 3 branches of government. There are 5 branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial, right? Number 4 is the electorate, which is supposedly tied into choosing the representatives and choosing the president, and then the president and the Senate appoint the judicial branch. Okay, so the electorate, the voters, that's number 4. And number 5 is the CIA, because the CIA functions really in a way that doesn't have a lot of examination and require a lot of approval from the other branches of government. I don't ever want to hear that the CIA is an executive function. It is most definitely not. It is its own separate branch of government. Okay, so how does this all relate into Jeffrey Epstein? The point is, there are powerful people, and they try very hard to preserve their power. And the only way to go about that is to kind of keep people in the dark, to kind of just water down the messages that the general public receives. They benefit from an ignorant populace. I mean, how otherwise, then, there would be changes in power structures. If there is any single change in the power dynamic, that means that the oligarchs would no longer be oligarchs. Maybe there would be some different people in their places. Maybe there would be a different power structure altogether, but those in power would be removed. And that could just open up a giant catastrophic can of worms. When a lot of people are talking about the suicide of Jeffrey Epstein, they're really trying to focus in on the Clinton death squads. Now, that's a sort of conspiracy theory that I've wanted to talk about on this channel, but I've never really gone about it because I'm not exactly sure how to approach the subject. The Clinton death squad is that people who have dirt on Bill and Hillary Clinton often end up dead. You've seen this countless times in the memes, and as well as other various things on YouTube about it. Even the suicide of Gareth Williams, like the man who was found dead in a red suitcase, and there with the lock on the outside. It's like he possibly could have dug up dirt on the Clintons. I'm not the most enormous believer in the Clinton death squad theory, because there are so many more ways to get dirt on the Clintons than that. Look at Hillary Clinton and say Libya. Look at Hillary Clinton in Syria, moving arms from Libya to Syria, destabilizing 2 major nations, and how this contributed to the refugee crisis. I mean, the list of actual wrongdoings by Bill and Hillary Clinton is so much greater than these Clinton death squad theories. But when we want to stay focused on Jeffrey Epstein, what we can say is that it is not unheard of for global elites to either get rid of somebody who was potentially dangerous to them, someone who could potentially bring them down, and get rid of them either by murder or by giving them release in exchange for their silence. That is also not unheard of. I mean, one of the other possibilities is, they could just do something even more heinous and then just kill an enormous amount of people and use their power to make it go away. The point is, The people who have power do not play by the rules. I'm not making any sort of joke. The rules are only for the followers. If the person in power is not going to follow them because they don't have to, because they're more powerful, that is not meant to be a silly statement. That is meant to be just one of the bitter pills of life. It's like if you have a boss in the workplace and the boss makes a new rule or something that, okay, this is how it's going to be from now on. No cell phones at work, no eating in the office. Do you think your boss is going to follow that? No, because no one is watching the boss. It's what Juvenal said. Who is there to guard the guards themselves? And like you also see examples like the Praetorian Guard, and I mean, this is just something that happens time and time again throughout history. The people who have the power do not play by the rules. And it's not abnormal to think that somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, who had connections to an enormous amount of high-profile individuals, would be like in hot water. If he were under arrest, no matter what, either they would get him out of prison and kind of just exile him, send him off to some deserted island, maybe St. Helena's in the South Atlantic, or maybe they would kind of end his life. I would only say one concluding note. Some people are saying, though, to give a little bit of pushback, it is impossible that Jeffrey Epstein could have committed suicide in his prison cell because the place where he hanged himself was too low to the ground. That is not true, though. You can hang yourself like at a very low height. We saw this in the case of Lyle Stevick. He tied a belt around his neck and then tied the loose end of the belt to a rod, and he committed suicide by falling to his knees and then just kind of like falling to his knees, and then that kind of strangled him and he asphyxiated himself that way. A little bit slower, but it is not impossible. And lots of people commit suicide in prison cells by hanging. I mean, we see this countless times, but did Jeffrey Epstein necessarily do that? It's highly improbable, but I do have to insist. We do not always know the facts. I mean, like, we don't have 100% of the facts, rather. There could be some new piece of information. But what do you have to say about Jeffrey Epstein? And what do you have to say about the power dynamics that are going on in the world? I would love to hear from you if you have any comments at all. And until next time.